Hi, I'm Paul Amos, founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is an organization of men or a community who've come together to discuss life's difficulties as well as the triumphs over those difficulties. Today we have a very special guest, a very famous guest, and someone who can speak to the heart of what is troubling so many men today. Please welcome Michael Cusick to the show.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you. He's an accomplished author. He's a great leader and a spiritual man that has done a lot for me in my personal journey. And so having Michael on is a real treat for all of us. Michael, I'd love to start today with some rapid fire questions just to let our audience know a little bit about you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. What was your first job?
My first job was working as a busboy at an Irish pub in Cleveland, Ohio.
Wow. Was it fun?
It was great. I worked there 4 years, worked my way up to becoming a cook. So I was the guy that made the salads and the sandwiches and the desserts and all that kind of thing.
That's awesome. Who's your hero?
It sounds cheesy, but I'll start with my dad. My dad had 46 years of sobriety and transformation and recovery. When he died, he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and really changed his life and really set a high bar for me when I inherited all of his addictions to have a life of recovery, and I'm forever grateful.
What are you reading right now?
I am reading, oh gosh, I read 6 to 10 books at a time, and
Holy. Wow.
and because it's just what I do, and I'm trying to think about what I'm reading right now. Um, I cannot actually think of one of the books. Oh, I'm reading a book called Lifeline Sampler, which is a 12-step daily book that you read a little bit. I'm trying to look over on my, there's a book called Hunger for Healing by Keith Miller. I'm doing a lot of work personally in the 12 steps, and I'm doing that after a long period of sobriety because I've just found that deeper work is so helpful. So it's a lot of that material.
All right. Favorite food?
Favorite food would be macaroni and cheese, but I can't eat it anymore because I don't do gluten. So I guess I have to do a gluten-free version of that.
I will tell you that macaroni and cheese is the most popular dish at my family's Thanksgiving, and we do it gluten free. So it can
Oh,
be
that's
done and it can
awesome.
be done well. That is a Paul Amos favorite too. And so thank you so much for saying that because I know how that feels, and I know that's a fun one to dive into. Um, let's start at the beginning. You know, when you talk about growing up and thinking about how this awful addiction that so many people have to pornography impacts people. Tell us about maybe a little bit about your youth, but also about people's youth and about what it is that pornography is impacting and a little bit about the journey toward that.
Yeah, well, I'm 58 years old and I've been a recovered sex addict for almost 30 years. And I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. And because of my age, I grew up long before the internet, before Al Gore invented it. And in that alcoholic family, there was a lot of abuse, and I was sexually abused as a young boy. And I consider exposure to pornography in childhood a form of sexual abuse. And so around age 4, I was first exposed to it, and around 8, I started compulsively looking for it. And by age 16, again, prior to the internet, you had to work hard to find pornography. We would go through dumpsters of 7-Elevens and try to find it at friends' houses where their dads had it hidden or out in the open. And even though I became a Christian at age 16, pornography, masturbation, and trying to find ways to act out sexually became a big part of my life. I became a Christian right around that time, and so a double life started, where on the one hand I knew that God loved me, that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, that there was power to overcome this, but it was something that was truly an addiction, and despite all the negative effects in my life, I couldn't overcome it, and I couldn't stop. I tried to memorize scripture and study the Bible more and pray harder, and nothing helped. And my many years later, married 3 years, my life came undone, and I almost lost my marriage to Julianne. This was back in 1994, because I didn't tell anybody. It was hidden. I had a double life, and it was really during that time where God set me free, back when, on the worst day of my life and the best day of my life, as I later came to see it.
First of all, thank you for being so candid. Thank you for being so honest and open about your journey. And it means a tremendous amount to our audience to know that there are people who can be 30 years in recovery from this. What was the turning point for you? What ultimately helped you shift from a life that, so sad to hear, started with abuse and ended up with an addiction? But what was the turning point in going forward for you?
Yeah, the turning point, I won't miss the obvious here, and that is that when I became a Christian at age 16, I deeply, deeply understood that God loved me. And even though I thought that He loved me but didn't like me very much, something deep inside of me knew that I was finally secure and safe in Him. And that transformation allowed for something to begin to happen in my life that was from the inside out. And it would take 15 years for that experience to come to fruition, where July 10th, 1994, I came home from work and got caught in a lie. And my wife, Julianne, heard the story that I had been with prostitutes and I had gone to strip clubs and with other women, and that I had lived a life of deceit and alcohol abuse. And this was all while being a Christian counselor and being on staff at a Christian university in ministry. And so my compartmentalized double life was exposed. And it was on that day where, if people say, did you become a Christian when you were 16 or in 1994, many years later, I would say, I don't know. Because on that day, I feel like I, for the very first time in my life, had nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to lose. And I felt like I was absolutely naked and terribly ashamed, as opposed to Genesis 2:27, which tells us that Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. But that was the turning point for me, where I saw how deeply rooted my struggle was, that it was more than just, whoops, I screwed up, but that there was real brokenness inside of me. And then secondly, I saw the pain and the damage and the destruction that I caused to my wife, and I thought, I've caused all this, and I don't even know how I got here. This is not the life I signed up for. And then fortunately, because I was at a Christian university where my bosses and mentors were psychologists and early guys in the Christian counseling movement, I was walked with by these men. And so the relationship and the care and the healing that I got really came in relationship. For months and months, my wife and I didn't know if we were going to make it. It was a really perilous journey. I slept on the floor in our living room. We didn't have children. We were living in an apartment. And, every day she said, if God would release me, I would leave you in a minute. And 32 years later, we're still married. And now, quite unexpectedly, God has given us a ministry to help couples and individuals with healing from sexual struggles.
It is so powerful to hear that story of overcoming. And what a wonderful gift you have in your bride, that she would stick with her commitment to God and to love you and to love you through this. And I am sure, I would think, and you can comment on this, that were it not for her, you probably wouldn't have the ministry that you do today, and the source of information and leading and following from others that you've been able to form.
Yeah, absolutely. Julianne is the best thing that's ever happened to me. She's my person, and every day is a gift with her. And not only would I not have the ministry, but we wouldn't have the two beautiful children that we have together. We wouldn't have the memories. And, I want to say, Paul, that not everybody's story ends like mine. Not all marriages survive, but the beautiful thing is that everybody's story can end with redemption. And you guys are called the redeemed for a reason, right?
Yes.
That God buys things back that have been lost, that God takes our broken hearts and makes us whole, that He takes what was intended for evil and He uses it for good. And I love to quote my friend Philip Yancey, who wrote in What's So Amazing About Grace years ago, that there is absolutely nothing in this life that God cannot and will not redeem if given an opportunity.
Wow. Well, thank you. Because one of the questions we always love to ask is, what does redemption mean to you? And you laid it out beautifully there. So thank you very much. You can't talk about addiction and you can't talk about pornography without the topic of shame. And so, one of the things I'd love for you to talk about is your personal journey with shame, and then some advice to our listeners about how they overcome shame so that they can truly be a child of God.
Absolutely. I think a lot of men will relate to my story where, as a 16-year-old and a brand new Christian, all the way up until age 30 when my double life was exposed. So for that 14 years, I would look at pornography, I would masturbate, I would do whatever sexual sin or acting out was the sin du jour. And then I would confess to God, and I would, 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I would confess hundreds of times. And after days and weeks, I would still feel guilty. And I never realized back then, because people didn't talk about shame the way that they do today, the difference between shame and guilt is, of course, guilt is I've done wrong, shame is I am wrong. Guilt is I've done bad, shame is I am bad. It's this judgment, it's an accusation, and frankly, it's a lie where evil says, you are not who God says you are. You are not beloved. You are flawed. You are not good enough. You are inadequate. You will never change. All of those kinds of things. And so as I began to learn about shame, it literally began to be the game changer. And we could do a whole separate podcast or a whole seminary course on this topic. But when we are released from shame, or when shame has begun to be chipped away at, it takes the guts out of addiction, because it's shame that fuels addiction. A lot of men spend time learning their triggers. Like, is it emails that come to me? Is it flirting with other women? Is it driving through a certain area of town, etc.? And what's more important oftentimes than our acting out triggers are the shame triggers, because when we experience shame, it's such a physiological, intense feeling that overcomes us. And then something sexual becomes the kind of medication to take care of that response.
Thank you. One of the things that we see with pornography, in addition to shame, is the unbelievable addiction that happens as a result and starts at such a young age. I was shocked to hear a statistic recently that the average young man encounters their first porn experience at age 10, thanks to the internet. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier in your story, it was a journey to find pornography in those days. But today it's at your fingertips and within a moment's click at all times, even free. And so maybe you could talk for a moment about helping kids and even adults step away or not see for their first time pornography and how it impacts you to continually focus on the depths and the danger that it is.
Yeah, so it's a complicated question, and it's an absolutely essential question. And I'm going to say two things. First of all, there are proactive things that most parents know about, like filters and online safety. Those put up a barricade, but anybody can jump over a barricade or walk under the barricade or go around the barricade. And because barricades are often around construction zones, they're often faulty or broken or actually not actually in the right place. So the struggle with pornography is a twofold issue. The first issue is that it's everywhere, that pornography is like secondhand smoke anymore. I remember when I moved here, shortly after I moved to Colorado, they passed a no smoking law in all public places. And you would immediately recognize, wow, I'm walking through Denny's restaurant for lunch for a business meeting, and my clothes don't reek like smoke anymore. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not a smoker anymore, but I can still die of secondhand smoke. So a person doesn't have to be a porn addict or actually look at pornography, and they can still be affected by the secondhand smoke of porn. And so that's if a child sees just one image, that's forever etched into their mind. And if that child is having a day where they're depressed or sad, or if their family is not especially nurturing or meeting their needs, whatever emotional turmoil is there, that sexual image immediately becomes a kind of comfort and soothing to that part of them. And the brain begins to wire along the lines of sex and sexual imagery becomes a comfort to me at a time where it's long before and premature that actually happening. So there's this one whole piece of being proactive and protecting in ways that are healthy and appropriate. And then the second part is the whole internal world of the person that's exposed to it and potentially, eventually, the addict. The addict, as you know, and as you talk about in this program, has to deal with his internal world and not just his behavior. Now, having said all of that, I tell parents that you must set up the barricades and put filters and things like that in place, but it's insufficient. Your child will be exposed to pornography, and if not looking at online images, maybe a kid at school will bring a naked picture on their phone. That's often how it's happening. Or at a sleepover or something like that, somebody will pull up their phone, or they will have printed out images, or there's sexting that's happening. And so there's any number of ways that can happen. And I think that we need to prepare for exposure to it and kind of see it as a given. And therefore, what do we do afterwards? And the lifelong conversation the conversation around sex is no longer the talk when a boy or girl turns a certain age in puberty. It's more of a lifelong conversation about sexuality and being proactive, talking about it, and just saying this is the reality that we live in.
It's a scary reality. Having 4 children myself, and walking them through it at an age when they didn't understand, but I was fearful that when they encountered it, if they didn't have the tools in place to do that, it could truly be something that was harmful to them. You know, we talked about children, but let's talk a little bit about adults. Obviously, pornography has a detrimental impact not only on men who are single, but certainly on men who are in marriages and relationships. I've heard that there is a lasting impact on the sexual wholeness that happens between a man and a woman as a result of watching pornography. Can you talk for a minute about, what you see and the impact it has when men continually watch it?
Yeah, I think on the most basic level, Paul, it makes it so that intimacy is more difficult because the sexual imagery is about objectification. It's not reality. Pornography is fundamentally non-reality, not only in the sense that it's a picture, but that it's airbrushed, that people don't look that way in real life, that the makeup and everything is really excessive. I don't know, most listeners probably have seen, there's some Christian women that were former pornography actors who have found Jesus, and they now have a ministry, and you kind of see them without makeup and you see them in their old, porn headshot, if you will, and it's like they look like two different people. And so it's really an illusion. And that illusion in a real relationship with a woman with flesh and blood is someone that they can no longer relate to. And what's happening, especially for younger men, they're experiencing erectile dysfunction, and men in their teens and 20s are taking Viagra and Cialis because a real woman can no longer arouse them because they need something that's so novel and different, or an act that is so pornographic that they're no longer aroused by their partner. And so it's literally killing sexual desire, and there's profound impact in terms of the relationship itself.
For a man who's reached that point, who has gotten to the place where he's overcome with pornography, how do they begin to take the right steps, and what do you suggest for walking out of it?
Yeah, well, I tell people, first of all, a couple of R's, an alliteration. The first R is to reach out. All healing from emotional and spiritual problems. And addiction is a spiritual and emotional problem, not a behavioral one. All healing happens in relationship. And so it's really important to reach out, to tell a friend, to tell a pastor, to go to a counselor. And secrecy and keeping things inside makes us believe that we're the only one. A friend of mine that I did a documentary with said, I thought I was the only person, the only Christian man in America supporting the $9 billion porn industry. But of course, he wasn't the only one. And for Christian men, it's just a given today. The second one would be to recognize, first is to reach out, to recognize that this is something that I'm powerless over. If in fact it's escalated to the point where it becomes a regular habit and it's affecting me in these significant ways and it's beginning to impact my significant relationship, my marriage, my fiance, my girlfriend, to recognize I can't do this. The first step in the 12 steps is to acknowledge that we are powerless over fill in the blank, pornography, lust, etc., and that my life has become unmanageable. And that unmanageable doesn't have to mean, that I have to go to inpatient treatment or I've lost my job. It simply means that it's having negative impact, and this is not the way that I want to live my life. And then, of course, the second and third step is all about surrender. So surrendering to a process where I believe our posture needs to be, I will do whatever it takes to address this and to heal. And it won't happen overnight. The third thing is to reorient. And I borrow that word from, interestingly, the late theologian and pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was martyred in Germany for his plot to kill Hitler. The movie Valkyrie with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt is based upon that plot, interestingly. But Bonhoeffer said that the pursuit of purity, sexual purity, is not about suppressing our lust. It's about reorienting our life to a larger goal. And so to reach out, to recognize, and then to reorient your life, instead of my goal becomes to stop pornography, reorientation means I want to now become the kind of person that doesn't need to look at pornography. See, the person that's addicted or compulsive, they have to look at pornography because they have no other way of meeting this need to elevate their mood, to find comfort, to find soothing, etc. All of our addictions are actually sinful and unhealthy ways of meeting a legitimate God-given need. And so this reorientation, it's so important that if a man says, okay, I'm going to quit porn, that's a legitimate goal, but a better goal is I want to become the kind of person that doesn't look at porn. And then that's a very different journey. It's about becoming whole. It's about learning, if we want to have integrity, what are the parts of us that are disintegrated?
Michael's ministry, for those in the audience who do not know, is called Restoring the Soul. And restoration has been a big part, Michael, of what you have focused on. Can you talk for a minute about some of the lessons you've learned in helping restore men to their former selves or into a better self as a result of Christ? And what have you learned about freedom as a result?
Wow, Paul, you're asking such great questions. First, let me define freedom. In Surfing for God, I quote Gerald May, who is a Christian psychiatrist, and he wrote a book called Addiction and Grace many years ago. And he said, the freedom question is not about whether we can do whatever we want. The freedom definition is about whether we can do what we most deeply want. And so when I was addicted, and I was as addicted as anybody else to sex and to alcohol and to people pleasing and frankly to lying, I could not do what I wanted to do, like the Apostle Paul. I would read Romans 7 over and over and over again. Why do I not do what I want to do, and why do I do what I don't want to do? And so freedom is that I can do what I most deeply want to do, which is to love God and to love others and to be wholehearted and to be fruitful in my life. And pornography and sex addiction is the opposite of fruitfulness. And so the first thing I would say is that change is possible. And that might sound so basic, but there are people listening to this who say, yeah, I had a filter, that didn't work. Yeah, I got an accountability partner, I lied to him, or we stopped meeting because they were struggling too, or I went to a men's weekend and they talked a little bit about lust, and they gave me a plan, and that didn't work. And that man is discouraged and somewhere believes inside that he can never change, that he might maybe manage this problem a little better, but this is who he's always going to be. And alongside that, there's a parallel that if I ever tell anybody about how deep my struggle is, or what I look at, or the kinds of things I'm attracted to, or even that I'm not attracted to women, I'm attracted to men, which is sometimes more common than we think, that if anybody found those things out, that would be the death of me. And that is a lie. Because the Bible calls us to be naked and unashamed, and we learn in our shame that first, the shame is a lie, and second, that it's in our shame that we're most deeply loved and known. So the truth is, you can be known, and that change is possible. Second thing is that I would say one of the big things I've learned is that change, deep internal change, transformation like the Bible talks about, takes a very long time. Our brother Tim Keller, who passed recently, wrote in the book Counterfeit Gods that most of us have very little idea how after becoming a Christian, how long it takes to get the gospel deep down inside of us. And so that journey, we can find encouragement, even though it takes a long time, as we're in relationship, because every struggle, every flaw becomes an opportunity for God's grace and to learn more of that. So those are the two big things.
Appreciate you sharing those with our audience. I know that will be beneficial. For those who haven't picked up on it yet, Michael has written a phenomenal book called Surfing for God, all about pornography, and I would encourage you to pick it up. But Michael, I'd like to read a quote from that book. The greatest barrier to the life of freedom that God desires for us is not our brokenness. It is our brokenness unsurrendered. When you wrote this, tell me what was going through your mind and a little bit about what you're looking for speak to from men through that.
Yeah, I think I tell the story maybe a page or two before this, but the reason why I wrote those words is I was a pretty passionate young believer, and I was put in a group of men who discipled me that it was just a great gift for the scripture that I was exposed to and got to learn and memorize, and I was really discipled in a profound way. And so one would think, wow, you should be able to overcome your addiction. And I memorize quotes and always have. So I took this quote from that 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon, and he said, and I wrote this in big letters and I taped it on the inside of my Bible, and it says, a Bible that's falling apart is usually owned by someone who isn't. And the reason why I wrote that there is, man, if I read my Bible enough, then my life that's falling apart at the seams inside, I'm going to fix it. And it never worked. So I read my Bible more and more. And so what I believed for a long time was that my brokenness was a barrier to knowing Christ. My brokenness was the very thing that kept God from embracing me and loving me and liking me. And what I now believe, and this is why I get out of bed in the morning, is my brokenness is not a barrier to the life I want. It's the bridge to the life I want. That when I put my brokenness out into the light, and we know that John 8 tells us the truth will set us free. When I bring my truth into the light before God and others, that brokenness becomes a gift and the bridge to the life that I want. And so the exposure of my double life and my sex addiction, that became a bridge to healing, to wholeness, and to freedom. And I just think that there's a message that's often preached from pulpits and in other places that the goal of Christianity is to fix us, as opposed to take our weakness, our vulnerability, our limitations, even our sin and our shame and the lies we believe, and to hold that in front of us before God and to say, don't just take this away, but take it and turn it into something beautiful. And that's what that was all about.
Well, it's powerful to hear you talk about the fact that people who feel like they've gone too far are not only resurrected, but they're redeemed. And it is a wonderful thing for our audience to know that nothing is too much, but bringing it into light is critical. Another critical element you mentioned is about discipleship, but as I think about it for us, it's men in community. Talk for a minute about the importance of sharing your journey with other men or other people, and what impact doing so has on your ability to recover?
Well, sharing my story and taking the message of freedom and healing to other men has been one of the greatest things to help my own healing. So again, in the 12 steps, and not everybody has to do the 12 steps and not everybody will, but there's a kind of biblical brilliance to how the 12 steps are broken down. And I think the most brilliant thing that God gifted the creators of the 12 steps with is in the 12th step, it says, having had a spiritual awakening, and back when it was founded, it was a Jesus-focused Christian ministry that they decided to make secular. Having had a spiritual awakening, we take the message and we carry it on to others, and we apply this in all of our affairs. And I don't think there's a better description of discipleship outside of the Bible than that. So we become spiritually awakened in Christ, and that awakening for the person in recovery is, I'm known. I no longer have any secrets. And in that sense of being known, there's the potential for shame to dissolve and to be chipped away at. And now that I have experienced this, and I may not have complete sobriety or healing yet, but now that I'm on this journey of recovery, I can then bring hope to other people, and I can begin to practice this way of living, this design for living that God gave us in everything that I do. And so I think it's important for men to know that there are people like me and others, like my friend Nate Larkin, who I think has been on your podcast, the founder of Samson and the Pirate Monks, and wrote a book called Samson and the Pirate Monks, and the founder of Samson Society, where he and I and others are called to tell our stories publicly. Not everybody is called to do that. Most people are not, but everybody is called to have at least one or two or more other people in community, as you said, that know them, that know all of their secrets, and that's how we heal. Because without that, we won't have that connection and contact with others that can support us, that can soothe us, that can comfort us, that can help us to see who we are when we don't see who we are, when we believe the lies of the enemy instead of the voice of love. In community, we really have everything that we need in Christ, and so it's just the key. But it's important to know that the focus can't be on sin management. The focus has to be on pursuing Jesus and pursuing becoming an authentic person who can live an integrated life, that wholeness and holiness go together.
We've spent most of the show talking about people who have really and truly come to the place that they need help. But I'd love for a moment to help men who haven't come to that place yet, who aren't necessarily desperate, but even justify and say they can handle pornography. What do you say to the person who feels like it's okay?
Oh gosh, there's so many ways I could approach this question. And as a therapist, I don't ever deal with the initial moral aspect of it. I believe that pornography is sinful in the sense that it violates love. Love is that I am bringing myself to something, and forgive the sexual metaphor, but that I'm depositing something, that I'm bringing something, I'm planting a seed and it will grow. And pornography and lust and fantasy simply can't do that in the same way that other kinds of hooking up and acting out can't do that. I think C.S. Lewis said it best. C.S. Lewis said that every time a man masturbates to an illicit image or fantasy, he chips away at his manhood. And so there's something of our masculine strength that is surrendered to something that can't bear fruit, that is not generative. And when we hold the tension inside of ourselves of the physical desire for release, but also that emotional desire for comfort, when we hold that tension, something in us as men grows. We grow emotionally and spiritually and in wisdom the same way that our genitals might grow physically if we act on the sexual arousal in an inappropriate way. And so God wants to use all of life to grow us as men. And as a man who's going to be turning 60 shortly, I'm aware that there are still places in me, Paul, that need to grow up. And not in a way where, I don't know if people will see this video, but not in a way where God has his glasses down on the end of his nose saying, grow up, you need to grow up. But rather, hey, son, I want to walk with you and help you to grow up into who you were meant to be. Because every good parent their greatest passion is to help their children become who they're meant to be. And so in that regard, pornography, lust, or anything that I turn to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure that is not God or one of his good gifts, like a wife or a girlfriend, that's going to take from me and rob to me if I surrender to that.
Well, you just mentioned wives, and earlier you mentioned Julianne. Let's talk for a minute about some of the resources that wives can depend on and some of the places they can go to help them survive when there is a pornography addiction.
Yeah, so first thing is there's a lot of books written on the topic of betrayal trauma or recovering from infidelity. And so if a wife is listening or if a husband listens to this and wants to pass this along, just Google betrayal trauma, and that is a experience that there is research in secular science that says that when a woman discovers or it is disclosed to her that her husband is struggling with pornography or other kinds of sexual addiction, that she has the potential in her body and nervous system to experience all the same set of symptoms as a woman that had been sexually assaulted, and therefore post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't say that to guilt men or to shame men, but just to add another layer to this, that looking at porn is not an innocent, victimless crime. It has an impact on multiple levels globally, but particularly on your wife or your intimate partner. And so there's a lot of good things written around betrayal trauma. And my wife, Julianne, has on our Restoring the Soul podcast a whole series of podcasts about what wives need to know about betrayal trauma. And then there's one for husbands, 5 things men need to know about betrayal trauma. Julianne has several talks about her testimony. And then although we don't do individual counseling on a week-by-week basis, we do intensive counseling at our program. And I would say that there's retreats and there's online courses and things like that that are now more and more available.
You've given so much wisdom and so much advice today, but I want to make sure we've covered as much as possible. And so, as one last question, is there any advice you would give to our audience about breaking free?
I would say back to that Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote, which actually inspired me to write Surfing for God. I'll say it again, that the pursuit of purity, and by purity, that doesn't mean uncontaminated. Purity in the New Testament is about wholeness. The word shalom, and when Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are pure of heart," he was talking about wholeness, that things being the way that they're meant to be. And so Bonhoeffer said that this purity is not about pushing our lust and our desire down, but moving toward a different way of living. And so to break free, most people listening to this, they're not going to be able to use their willpower, their discipline, or their spiritual muscle. They're going to actually need internal healing. And when we surrender to that process by saying, God, do whatever it takes to set me free to live the life that I want to live, I believe that God honors that. And the only condition that I would put on that is that that surrender has to involve another person. We can't walk this journey alone. Somebody said that the question is not whether we will surrender, but to whom or what we surrender. And so when men give into pornography, they're surrendering to something that they believe and are experiencing will bring that soothing and that comfort, versus surrendering to God, which doesn't mean I'll never do this again, but it actually means acknowledging powerlessness, that we've got no game. When a man says to God, God, I've got no game, I'm impoverished, I don't bring anything to, I can't make any more promises, that's when real healing happens.
Michael Cusick, you have been a blessing to our audience today. Thank you for your time and your taking it out of your busy schedule, and we loved having you on.
Thanks, Paul. It's always great to talk with you.
To our audience, thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please feel free to write a review on Apple or any other platform where you view your podcast. Strongly encourage you to check out our website, theredeem.com. You can get all types of information, reading, and also special information on things we're doing, like small groups. And then on August the 24th, we're going to be having a very special event here in Columbus, Georgia, where Tim Tebow is going to come and talk about a message of hope. And so I thank you so much for your time. Good day, and God bless.
We want to take just a moment to remind you about Restored, the Redeemed Men's event, a very special night of fellowship, faith building, and encouragement taking place this August at the Bib Mill Event Center in Columbus, Georgia. It will feature a keynote by Heisman Trophy winner Tim Tebow, along with inspirational messages from our ministry team here at The Redeemed, and it's all about helping men find freedom from their personal struggles by discovering the true purpose that God has laid out for them. Tickets are going fast, so go to theredeemed.com/restored now to get your tickets. The conference is scheduled for 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, August the 24th, and we hope to see you there.